Yes.
My guess.
Okay, recording in progress. Thank you so much. Okay, and then I guess we can get started. Let me see here. Where's my share screen? There it is. Doop. Okay, there we go. Okay, we are sharing. Okay, so thank you everyone for attending my presentation on, oops, that's not what I wanted to do. Woo! Go backwards, go backwards. My brains and anatomy and learning. Whoa, okay, sorry. I just want to move this screen. There we go.
That's okay. Just take a minute and get ready,
Yeah.
Larissa. There's no rush here. Take a deep breath. Take your time,
Woo!
okay?
Oh no. Okay, so yeah, this is my brains plus anatomy plus awareness equals learning presentation. So yeah, first I would like to introduce myself and everybody can hear me okay? I'm using these headphones for the first time with Zoom. So it's weird because my ears are plugged, so I can kind of hear myself, but I can't hear my voice through the headphones. So it's a little strange. Okay, so yes, I am a massage therapist. I've been practicing for 17 years now. I've been studying casually physics for about 10, started reading books about that a few years ago. I've been studying biofield or energy vis-a-vis Tai Chi and Qigong and things like chakras since I was a teenager. So I've been aware of that for a really long time. And so this presentation represents a merging of things that I learned through research for this presentation, as well as things that I kind of knew already, and to bring it together in kind of a meaningful way. And disclaimer, this is not exhaustive. It's not comprehensive. I think of it more of like a buffet. I'm telling you about the buffet. You don't have to go and eat anything. You don't have to try it all. You don't have to digest any of it. I'm just telling you about it. And so it might come across as a bit of cognitive overload, but that means I'm challenging you to step outside your comfort zone, which is kind of where the learning happens. So again, don't panic. You're going to be okay. All right. Can I do that? Yes, I can. Okay, so here's our agenda and objectives. First, we're going to talk about big picture to do with the brain. Hemispheres, the corpus callosum, the prefrontal cortex, the entorhinal cortex, and the hippocampus, and the amygdala, and kind of how they function specifically to do with learning. And then we're going to go into a deep dive for small things with microtubules and the mirror neuron system. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the biofield, the fascial system, and your awareness and how those things might come into play with learning, and then try to tie it all together. So you can see the objective here: define, describe, recognize major and minor components of the brain, nervous system, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so hemispheres of the brain. Yes, we've got a left side and a right side. And I'm just going to unplug this so it makes it a little less weird for me. Hold on, I need this one to be up here. Okay, that one. Okay, so we've got a left side and a right side that is divided by the corpus callosum, and we're going to talk more specifically about that in another slide. Lateralization, that has to do with things happening more on one side than the other. But as you can see, like you've got the blue side and the right side, your logic, your science on one side, and your creativity and intuition and imagination more on the other side. But it's important to understand that everything is being processed at the same time by both sides. It's not like one side is really dominant while the other side is passive. Um, and so the desiccation happens somewhere in the spinal cord. It happens for different motor or sensory neurons at different levels, but the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body and vice versa. So that's an interesting flip-flop that happens. And it'll come up as important later on, but 86 billion neurons in the brain. That's so many neurons. And we're going to talk a little bit about other brains as well. So just keep that number in mind when you think about how many neurons there are in the brain, all doing things all at the same time. Okay. Okay, so looking more at the hemispheres. So it is generally symmetrical from left to the right side, but there are a couple of areas that are naturally asymmetrical. When it's supposed to be symmetrical, but it's not, that's where we get mental disorders like schizophrenia and depression. Language happens particularly on both sides, which is why we study language in regards to the hemispheres so much. We've got some particular language centers in the brain, Broca's and Wernicke's, that also have emotional connections with the brain. Hold on. Are you guys chatting? What's going on in the chat? Okay, I'm going to look at that later because I don't understand it. Hold on. Okay. No, that's not what I want to do. What was that? Okay. So yeah, some activities do happen on both sides, but in different ways. So the left side of the brain tends to process things more analytically and faster, whereas the right side of the brain process things more slowly and more emotionally. Okay. And one study that we looked at, or we was referenced in one of the articles that we looked at, said that the left hemisphere is connected more to the parasympathetic nervous system, and the right hemisphere is more the sympathetic nervous system. And so those are your fight or flight versus rest and digest parts of your brain, parts of your nervous system. Okay, so I think I mentioned a little bit earlier the brain-sided dominance thing is not really, we're not really thinking in terms of that anymore. It might be with certain activities, but I'm an artistic person. That means I'm more right-sided, but I also understand and love science. That means I'm more left-sided. So it's not like one person can be pinned down and said, you're more this or more that. Um, that's just not how we're looking at the brain anymore. Let's see here. Okay, so corpus callosum. Yeah, so it divides the left and the right side, and it is made up of nerve fibers, just like the rest of the brain. It has four major components: the rostrum, which is right in front of, or right behind your frontal brain part. The genu, which is right up behind that, and the body throughout the middle, and then the splenium, which is at the back. And so it helps the brain coordinate sensory information and movement between the two sides. And it's got 200 million axons, nerves. And they're myelinated, which has to do with the insulation. So the male versus female thing, I remember learning in massage therapy school years and years ago that we think of women being better at multitasking because they have a thicker corpus callosum, and therefore men are not as good as multitasking. That's out the window. We don't think that way anymore. That study was done on a very small group of brains, and it was like five or six male brains and three or four female brains, and those female brains happen to have thicker corpus callosums. So the idea of male versus female is just, especially in the times we're in now, it's very reductive. The idea that, oh, a man can't do anything, can't do this because he's got a man brain, and females now have to do the multitasking because they have female brain. That's a social thing that we've constructed that's just not, we're not doing that anymore. The idea of connectomy is the brain's picture of its own connections. So the brain is a little bit self-aware. I thought that was kind of a cool point. Okay. So moving on to the prefrontal cortex. So yeah, you can see in the picture here, it's located right behind your forehead. It's responsible for your executive functions, a whole lot of things, a whole lot of things in the prefrontal cortex. Your thinking, your planning, your emotions, your adapting to new environments, your decision making, your problem solving, your goal setting, your focus, your working memory, your self-control, your learning, and your integration over time. So, like, so many things all at once. And your personality kind of lives in your prefrontal cortex. If it's damaged, you can become a whole nother person. You get bonked on the head, you might have a concussion, and you're probably going to be acting different until your brain can normalize itself. And that takes time. So it's got five major subsections, and we're going to look at that in another slide to see more specifically what those sections do. I'll let you read those on your own. The thing that I found really interesting that I could really relate to, it's not fully developed until you're in your mid-20s. So you're not really a grown brain adult until you're in your mid-20s. And I'm going to get into that into the next slide as well. So your all the different parts of the brain. I'm not gonna, these are like tongue twisters. I'm not gonna say them all. You can read, but you can see like planning, problem solving, and focusing all in one area, your feelings, your choices, ability to change gears, and your heart and blood pressure. I found that really interesting. And it made me remember when I was in art school back in like '04, '05, and I was working at a hotel. I was doing my job, doing my thing, working on my room, and my manager would come and say, Larissa, you got to go do this thing. Somebody needs help in this other room doing another thing. And I would be like, I don't want to change gears right now. I can't do that. I was like 21, 22, and I had a really hard time. I actually had a hard time with changing gears all the way into my 30s. And so that's the part of your brain where it's like, oh, you got to shift gears now. And I can understand when I first read all of those things together, I was like, why? Okay, if you're going to shift gears, you might have to go from doing nothing, sitting down, to getting up and moving. So yeah, your heart rate, your blood pressure might need to get involved in that. So yeah, moving on, your medial PFC, your behavior adjustments, your decision making, your judgment, your discernment, your impulse control, your outcomes-based decision making. All of those things are clustered together in different sections. So like one of the analogies, one of the papers I read talked about was like if you're driving and you're coming up to a yellow light, do you speed up? Do you try to run the light? Do you slow down? You're thinking immediately like, what are the consequences of if I run this light? Do I have time? If I run it, is there a camera? Am I going to get caught? Can I afford the ticket if I get a ticket? All of those things, all of those decisions are being made really quickly, all just in that split second. Okay, so disorders with the PFC. So as educators, you'd want to think about like if we're seeing behavior we don't like in the classroom, maybe there's a brain issue going on. And so being curious about what that student might be going through. So you can see this list, the ADHD, bipolar disorder, depression, OCD, substance use, epilepsy, schizophrenia, and brain injury. All of those things are things you're going to want to think about if your students are having behavior that you're not really liking. So moving on to the hippocampus. They said it was a seahorse shape. I'm not seeing a seahorse. I'm seeing more like a worm. So this is another one for processing, for forming memories and emotions, particularly. So it's in the temporal lobe. And there are a few things that I found interesting about the hippocampus, particularly like the emotional processing with memory forming. Like I know when I'm trying to learn something new, I'll either remember something specific that has a feeling attached to it, or I'll make one and I'll tie that in with the memory to help remember it, or the information to help remember it. The spatial navigation, I found this really interesting. We get into the grid neurons when we talk about the entorhinal cortex later on, but it also helps with learning in space, like helping map spaces like the room that you're in. The hippocampus helps process information from the prefrontal cortex from long term to short term, or short term to long term. And again, helps connect memories to emotions. So, one of the things I found really interesting about the hippocampus was how connected it is between all of the other parts of the brain. And so, again, that comes back to your processing, right? And again, it's part of or for the first time, it's part of the limbic system, which the amygdala is a part of that too. Okay. So more about the hippocampus. Um, so we read a PDF report about error-based learning that talked about the hippocampus and its relationship with the entorhinal zone. So the hippocampal cells will fire whether you're getting it right or getting it wrong in terms of an error-based learning. Um, but with these ones that we know that this is the study that shows that we know we learn more from getting it wrong. So the error-based learning, or the cells that detect errors, fire more when you're learning, when you're getting it wrong, right? So again, my biggest takeaway from learning about the hippocampus was how interconnected it was. And so this is the entorhinal cortex, which is just below the hippocampus and also part of the limbic system. This one serves as a gateway to the hippocampus. So it processes the information and then decides what moves on to the hippocampus or helps process it. so that it makes sense to the hippocampus. So this is the part of the brain that has those grid cells that actually like the cells make the grid in they form the pattern of the grid in their own little like world that maps like when you're looking at a room, it forms the grid and projects it, but then it's making it in the cells as well, which I was like, if I'm reading that right, which seemed pretty interesting. And so for this one, the entorhinal cells fire stronger, or sorry, they fire less strong than the hippocampal cells, but there's more of them. So they work together to do that error-based learning thing. And I found it very interesting, like how they coordinated. Uh, so moving on to the amygdala. Um, there was a TV show. I didn't reference it in my references, but there's a TV show. I always think about the amygdala. I think about this scene from Firefly where the character has to go get her brain scanned, and the person scanning her brain is like, they stripped her amygdala. She feels everything. And I was like, oh, the amygdala feelings. So the amygdala is part of how we process our feelings, and and it takes all of the sensory data and it processes it and decides what's going to come up to your awareness level. And it has to do with like your feelings too. So it processes how you feel about what you're sensing. It has roles in your implicit memory, so the things you know how to do without thinking about it. It's critical for your social cues and interpretation. So if your amygdala isn't working properly, like if you're autistic and you're not getting those social cues, the amygdala is probably not working properly. Learned behaviors and addictions. Again, like the social thing of how we're supposed to behave. The amygdala helps us learn what those social cues are and what they mean and process how we feel about them. So yeah, dysfunction with the amygdala is associated with your mental health issues like your PTSD, your mood and panic disorders. And again, the processing that salient information. So the amygdala is a tiny little thing you can see, but it does a really big job. Okay, take a breath. So we just talked about a whole bunch of stuff, big stuff in the brain, and we're going to move on to some littler things. Okay. So I learned about microtubules a long time ago, reading one of my physics books, and we'll get into it, but the coolest thing about the microtubules is that it suggested that how they function is what connects us to the quantum. They function on a quantum level. If you don't know what that means, I'm gonna let you figure that out on your own, but it's like um the quantum is like the smallest possible level of doing things, but it's also a connection to the whole universe, which is kind of crazy. So the microtubules are made up of tubulin proteins that there's two different kinds you can see in the picture there. And the picture looks like it's kind of like what's it called? Binary code, like one and one or ones and zeros. But the picture here, it makes it look like it's alternating all of the time, but those proteins can rearrange themselves and actually have a completely any pattern you can imagine. Um, I'll get into that again in a minute. But so the microtubules are found in the cytoplasm of animal and plant cells. Every cell has them. They all have them. But we talk about them particularly in the nervous system because of memory. So they perform roles in cell division, movement, and shape maintenance. So your cellular plasticity and ability to maintain and change shape, they do that. They also carry information within the cell. So within the cell, if you need to carry proteins, informational molecules from one part to the other, or from the outside of the cell or inside the cell as well. So intracellular communications and between cells, they help communicate, right? And so they have a highly dynamic region, which is where all the protein rearranging happens, and they have a stable area so that it can stay attached and doesn't fly off into space. So again, the quantum level thing, when they're moving so fast that it's almost like they're in a superposition, which is again a quantum reference. And that's how it's related to the quantum realm. And that's how we think that indicates that we have consciousness. I know it seems complicated, but it's like, again, you're just looking at the buffet. I'm just planting seeds of information. Maybe you want to look into it deeper later on. So I think I mentioned before, the way the molecules, the proteins arrange themselves is a code. It's like a language, and that's how we encode our memories. So it's not the idea of memory to me is kind of this abstract thing, but this is exactly how the cells are actually coding the memory. So all of the little proteins will rearrange themselves and it'll, I don't know, look like a picture of a flower or some kind of binary code that I don't understand. And that's how the memories are encoded. I found that fascinating. Okay, moving on, the mirror neuron system and empathy. So if you think about learning and being taught or teaching, we know that storytelling and getting an emotional response makes for better learning, right? And so the mirror neuron system is kind of plays an important role of how we learn, right? There's specialized cells that activate whenever we either observe or imagine observing something. So it talks about top down versus bottom up. The bottom up is an automatic thing that happens, whereas the top down is more of a cognitive thing where you kind of do it intentionally. So this is crucial for developing your social skills. In conjunction with the amygdala, if you think about it, right? You're watching somebody, how they act. You think, oh, well, that's how I'm supposed to act in that situation. So you can see in the picture too, like there's so many areas where you can find mirror neurons. They're in every part of the brain. And I reference the Pygmalion effect because it has to do with if I believe in you, you'll believe in yourself. And if I don't believe in you, you might not believe in yourself. So, as educators, it's vital that we have positive expectations. And so, if we're modeling, I believe in you to our students through their mirror neurons, they're more likely to believe in themselves, right? So, you get better outcomes that way. Okay. So, moving on to the human biofield. Um, I mention this because if you think about quantum, if you think about the mirror neurons, all of those things coming together, the biofield is another tool. If you're just aware of it, it's a tool you can use just to regulate yourself, but also to connect to your students. And I love thinking of in terms of like if you're in a classroom, there's that collective that's happening, all of those brain waves overlapping to understand and think about things. So yeah, the human biofield is your electromagnetic field produced by our cells, organs, systems that are all overlapping and expanding. Your heart creates the strongest one. We're going to learn a little bit more about the brain and the heart later on. And your biofield is affected by your thoughts, your beliefs, your emotions. Some people can see, you colloquially will call it the aura. Some people can see that energy. It's a real photographable thing. And so if you're unwell or if you're angry, your biofield will shift and change and look different. And so I mentioned the part contains the whole because within your biofield is everything that you are, everything that's happened to you, and on a quantum level, everything that could happen to you in the future, which again is pretty, I find that mind blowing. So your biofield functionally is your awareness. Okay. It is your consciousness. And it is kind of like the bridge from me to you. Okay. All right. The fascial system. So the fascial system, it's a connective tissue organ that lives in the body. It's made up of hyaluronic acid, collagen, and water. For those of us who are worried about aging, you notice those creams that have hyaluronic acid or collagen in them. That's it. That's your connective tissue. That's why they're selling it to you. It surrounds and encapsulates every cell in the body and creates a system. the cool thing about the fascial system is that it's a communication highway for all cells. So you have your nervous system has neurotransmitters and you have your hormones that go through the blood to connect and communicate between systems in the body, but the fascial system is happening instantly. Biophotons, all of these, everything that's happening with the system in one, like your liver's in distress, your brain knows about it through the fascial system before the neurotransmitters or the hormones reach it. And so it's the embodiment of interconnectivity. Again, everything is connected. Okay. So moving on to your extra brains. Remember how your big brain has 86 billion cells? Well, there's 40,000 neurons in your heart that function independently of the central nervous system. It's complex and intrinsic to the heart, and it's completely autonomic. It works on its own. So those sayings about what the heart wants and what your heart thinks or your heart being broken, all of those things are now scientifically understood. We know that there's a tiny little brain in your heart that it thinks, it understands, it's perceiving its surroundings, and it knows what's going on. So if you're trying to make a decision and your heart is saying do this and your brain is saying do that, your heart can actually override what's going on in your brain. So your heart is, as we know from the biofield, your heart creates more energy, it has the biggest signal, but it also has the capacity to override and is stronger. Okay. There's also 500 million neurons in your gut that operate independently of your central nervous system. So you have three brains in your body. Three brains. So if we think about embodied learning and, oh, my gut told me this and my heart told me that and my brain is thinking that, if you can get alignment between all three of them, oh yes, you raise your hand on purpose?
Yeah, thank you, Larissa. I was just pointing out it's 2:27 by my timing. Are
Yes.
you on a 30-minute Zoom account?
A 40-minute one. Yeah, I'm like super close to the end. This is my
Okay,
second to
cool. I
last
just
one.
don't want you to run out and go over the recording. Okay,
Yeah,
keep
no,
going.
great. Thanks. Yeah, this is just about the end here. So yeah, again, three brains. If you can get all three of your brains to function together, that alignment and just being aware, like your students are, if you can educate your students about how many brains they have, they might be a little bit more empowered. Okay, so what does all of this mean for us as educators? I know for me as a massage therapist, I use my awareness all of the time to understand my clients. They'll ask me questions and I'll curate an answer based on my readings through all three of my brains and my biofield. I think as educators, understanding how complex and connected everything is, we can come to it with a little bit more compassion and understanding. Um, I know that I use my awareness to learn. I know there's been moments where, like, if I don't know, I'll picture somebody else. What do they know? What would Andy say? Or what choice would Andy make on the test? I'm not looking at her sheet, but I'm thinking about somebody smarter than me that might have the better answer. And I'm using my awareness for that too. Um, and so, yeah, just being empowered through all of this knowledge, I think can make us better educators and better learners. So that is basically my whole presentation. Thank you so much for listening. And again, this is a buffet. You don't have to eat everything. You don't have to digest everything. I just hope that I planted some seeds of awareness for you to chew on later. And yeah, I'm getting the 10-minute warning. Okay, I'm going to hold on here. Stop my record. Did that do that? I think so. Okay, so I guess we can move on to question and answer time.
Okay, well, first of all, like, thank you very much.